Cloud Pod, where the forecast is always cloudy. We talk weekly about all things AWS, Google, and Azure. We are your hosts,
Justin,
Jonathan,
and Peter. Episode 41, recorded on September 24th, 2019. The Cloud Pod, now with Dynamic Parallelism. Hey guys, how's it going tonight?
Good. Looking forward to the weekend, though.
Yes, the weekend can only get here much slower because it's time for my vacation, and so the last week before vacation is always the longest.
Always.
Yes.
In honor of working all day until the minute we started this podcast at 8:45, I'm having a Founders All Day IPA right now.
Nice. Going old school. Back to the drinks. I have nothing, so that's how I planned for this podcast.
We had the work shindig this afternoon, and they had some Sculpin Grapefruit IPA, which was what I would have picked anyway, but it's great that they gave it away for free.
There you go. Very good. Well, we actually have a bunch of general topics tonight, just because there's been some interesting think pieces and some other interesting outside of the cloud world news that's so relevant to us, and so we're gonna jump into that before we get into the normal program here of AWS and Azure and Google. So the first one is actually a Google article, but it's more of an opinion piece or news article kind of guidance post, and Google does a lot of these right now because I think they're just trying to build market share and mind share in the world, and so they're doing a lot of philosophical type posts, if you will. So this one's called the CIO's Guide to Cloud Success, Decoupling to Shift Your Business into High Gear. And they go on to talk about an 80% of success is showing up to the cloud. But unfortunately for enterprises migrating to the cloud, that doesn't always occur. And they quote a recent McKinsey study saying enterprises are falling short of their IT agility expectations by not moving to the cloud. And they claim this disconnect is occurring due to the way that organizations adopt cloud, either by renting pooled resources from cloud vendors or investing in SaaS subscriptions. And this doesn't solve their needs, of course, and it just allows them to adopt things a little faster and a little bit more efficiently. They can go on to say that cloud services are increasingly about intelligence, automation, and velocity, and not just about becoming economies of scale offered by big providers running out their infrastructure. And they basically go on to talk about this in more depth, and then they pull in Anthos and then do a sales pitch for you on Anthos. And then they basically equate this down to decoupling, in their mind, equals agility, shifts your development into high gear, and decoupling increases your decoupling does increase your complexity in some cases, and they're saying it doesn't. And so basically their end-all argument is Anthos, agility minus the complexity, which is really not what I think this is. But what do you guys think?
It sounds like a wonderful sales pitch for somebody, but I completely disagree with their 4 points. the summary at the end of the thing. I think applications shouldn't be entirely unaware of the infrastructure they run on. They should be aware of the constraints of the system. I think teams that are decoupled from each other won't work well together. Development is decoupled from operations. I mean, I can't believe that Google have been pioneers of DevOps, but they're separating the two now. And security.
They've always had that model, though. They've always had the dev and SRE team being separate, but with engagement structure that gave both of them pain if they went too slow and both of them pain if they went too fast, basically.
Yeah, I do like the way they organize the SRE, because they have engineers from development moving in and out of SRE, sharing knowledge, and you sort of take your turn to train other people and to be responsible for the uptime and things. I wish more people could do that. It's difficult to get there.
Definitely tough to do anything when it takes your system 26 hours to run build and integration testing because it's so big.
Yeah, I kind of feel like these 4 points, including the security being decoupled, I think it's like the only way you could possibly be successful if you consider these 4 topics is by using Anthos. So it's really just cornering people into spending an enormous amount of money on their product.
Yeah, but Anthos is relatively complex. You're talking about buying infrastructure to run in your data center that you then run the Anthos software layer on top of. At $10,000 for 100 vCPU. You have to manage it, you have to care and feed for it, you have to keep it patched. There's a lot of complexity to that, and that complexity ends up being on your infrastructure team, which is kind of the benefit of going to cloud in the first place, is trying to get away from that. And so that's actually kind of the interesting part about Outposts, and the fact that the hardware isn't your responsibility. You're buying Outposts with the hardware and all that kind of included, and the support and maintenance is all done by Amazon. Whereas Anthos is very much bring your own hardware, we'll make it work, but you're responsible for maintaining it.
I'm sure Google will be happy to sell you some professional services to get it up and running, because most sort of traditional infrastructure teams aren't going to be the people who have the right skills to run Anthos.
Yeah, it's definitely a different model, different skill set, and with any new technology, you're not going to find a lot of bodies who already know it.
Well, I mean, especially since I'm not actually sure it's shipping to anybody for reals yet.
Yeah. Day one. I want to hire someone who has 10 years Anthos experience. I love it when I get those requests from customers. It's like, that technology's been out 6 months.
Yeah, isn't that always fun? Especially entry-level positions with 5 years of experience. That's always great.
Yeah.
Well, interesting enough, as I was going through this article, and I stumbled across another blog post by Tyler Treat, who's a managing partner at Real Kinetic. And he wrote an interesting blog post that he had some perspectives that I hadn't considered, and I thought we'd share here on the podcast. So his blog post is called "What's Going On with GKE and Anthos." And he starts out talking about, when TK took over for Diane Green, a lot of people expressed concern about what this meant for the future of GCP. Vendor lock-in, of course, is already the number one concern for cloud adopters, and Oracle, of course, is notorious for locking customers into expensive contracts, as we all know. And Google, he goes on to say, has never been a customer-first company. It's always been a technology leader, but it struggles immensely with enterprise sales and support. And they also don't dog food in their own technology because they have their own internal systems like Borg and other things that actually they use internally versus using something like GKE. Of course, in the case of Oracle, customer isn't first either, but it does know how to meet customers where they are and sell in a way that resonates with enterprise. And Google has approached sales engineering in a way that has failed to resonate with customers by attempting to map its superior technology offerings onto customer problems. And nothing could, of course, be more putting off to people like me, decision makers in IT, where a round hole that SE is telling you is going to be fixed with the square peg they're trying to sell you. So that's very interesting. But, it goes on to the speculation that he has about the things that they just announced. So we talked about this, I think, last week on the show. The new binary authorization feature, for example. So the binary authorization feature, which we talked about, is right now in beta. And after it goes GA, it gives you 6 months free to try it out. But then if you want to keep it after that, you need to talk to your sales rep, according to their documentation. And basically starting in March 16th, 2020, GKE clusters will need to be part of an Anthos-subscribed organization to enable the binary auth. And so basically what it kind of goes on to say here is that if they're starting to bundle these really interesting features, and he also pointed out that Cloud Run is already in this model, as well as Istio, that their Anthos features are not GKE features, they're actually creating a very expensive lock-in scenario to get you into these very high-level services that are very difficult to run on top of Kubernetes natively, and that this is probably the most Oracle thing they've done to date.
But on the other hand, they've got they're coming up with novel solutions to problems, and if Anthos is the way they can deliver those, if it's not possible to deliver those on GKE, then at least they've got a product that people can use now.
Yeah, but I can get service mesh, I can get Lambda functions, I can get all these things running on AWS today, and if those technologies move over to Outposts, then I get the both benefits. This is saying that I'll even have to license Anthos inside Google's cloud to use these features, which that's a really interesting take.
So if we think about this from a realistic perspective, cloud provider who's the number 3 cloud with a very small percentage of the market is in no position to lock in customers with super expensive options when other vendors have cheap alternatives and are leading the pack. So if I had to predict where this was going, I would predict that it's going to land where basically you get Anthos for free in Google's cloud and you pay for it to run in your data center.
And if that's the case, GKE is just going to get rebranded to Anthos. Then I'm relatively okay with that. Right. But that hasn't been said, and so he does talk about in the last part of the article about maybe the best case Google is just muddying the waters with unclear marketing direction and strategy. But is it also something a little bit more sinister there too? It's definitely an interesting question because
you can't be sinister if you don't have any customers.
They do have customers. We talk to them quite often in the night. They tell me that they're moving off of Google.
Yeah, what percent of the market do they have? It's not like they won the market as a monopoly and now they're using monopolistic practices. If that's what they're trying to do, then wow, that's really bad leadership because it's not going to go anywhere. You're going to lock in the tiny little percent you have of the market and push away all new customers effectively. So, it works when you're a monopoly, not when you're not.
Yeah, but if you keep it there in the back pocket and you don't execute the vision until people are locked in, it does make an interesting risk. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's necessarily the case. I just think it's an interesting perspective I hadn't thought of. Maybe a little bit more, aggressive in the approach and more Oracle-ish in your nature. And maybe it's just, people thinking TK is more an Oracle guy, and this is just a perfect example of what an Oracle thing would do. Maybe that's the case here, and I agree with you. I don't know that this is the right strategy for them, or it's any strategy for them, but it's definitely an interesting think piece to consider.
If anything, it might be a method of limiting the uptake of the service in the beginning before they're ready to scale it.
Maybe.
Now, why do that though? Instead of just having a private beta or a limited release, it seems bizarre. But I just cannot get over the fact that you can get a virtual CPU for like $25 for a month, but the software is going to cost you $100 a month to sit on top of it. It's just the discrepancy between the hardware and the software now is it's very Oracle for sure.
I just keep looking back at a couple of the Amazon features that came out. I can't remember which security ones it was, but it's like, the price decreases of 90% happen when you release something that you're just not ready to scale yet, and then when you're ready to scale it, the price comes down.
Well, that may be in the case with something like Fargate, right, where we talked about how expensive Fargate was versus running just ECS natively, and then they have that massive pay cut that or price cut that basically cut it down to 8 or 9% more than running on your EC2. And that's an attractive outsourcing model where that's not a bad price to pay for not managing ECS nodes. But yeah, it's definitely gonna be interesting to see where this goes, and definitely something to keep an eye on. But at the end of the day, it may be nothing, but it's definitely interesting
for sure. And the software sounds cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm excited to see what happens with Anthos. I think it'll be interesting, and if it does make a lot of the stuff easier, I think that's what Kubernetes desperately needs, and that's why I'm really interested to see what VMware does with Project Pacific, because I think they might actually crack the enterprise Kubernetes problem in a way that people are not expecting. So we'll see.
Hey everyone, Jonathan here. I just wanted to take a minute to thank the cloud consulting gurus at Foghorn for helping make the Cloud Pod possible. These folks truly get it. Cloud consulting experts since 2008, they are premier tier partners with AWS, Google Cloud Platform Silver, and Microsoft Azure partners. From multi-cloud to containers to moving full production workloads to the cloud under the tightest compliance, Foghorn's team of full-stack cloud engineers have been there, done that, gotten the t-shirt, and are ready to share their experience with you. If you're in the market for some talent to supplement your team, visit www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. www.fogops.io/thecloudpod. Foghorn, the promise of cloud delivered.
All right, well, moving on to other news. There was a bit of a kerfuffle in the open source space with Chef. I don't know how much you guys are aware of this, but basically, Chef was identified as potentially selling, or no, they did sell software to the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Office, apparently starting as far back as the 2014, 2015 timeframe, and then, of course, renewed it last year. One of their former employees, an open source programmer and a well-known DevOps guru, was deeply unhappy when he found out about his software being potentially used in ICE and the separation of children and all those political things we're not going to talk about here. But he, in response to this, felt from a moral obligation that he needed to pull 3 of the Ruby gems that he wrote at the time when he was at Chef, and they were still in his name. They were attributed to him in Ruby gems. They were attributed to him on open source. They definitely looked like things that he had ownership of, and Chef was definitely referencing those versions of these pieces of code versus a Chef version of the repo or Ruby gem. And this, of course, resulted in a very large portion of the Chef community having builds break in a really bad way, because these 3 gems are pretty integral to how to use Chef today in this modern world. And at the end of the day, Seth Vargo, who is the open source developer who said, I'm not trying to make a political statement, he said. As software engineers, we have to abide by some sort of moral compass. When I learned that my code was being used for purposes that I perceived as evil, I had to act. And he did apologize for the disruption to you if you were impacted by this. Chef scrambled to restore the gems and kind of bungled that as well, accidentally removing Seth's name from the code, which is really kind of a dirty trick. And then, overall, just really bad missteps in the first part of this, resulting in a formal letter that their CEO, Barry Criss, wrote to their employees that got leaked out to the press, basically saying that, their decision to support government is free trade, and we don't really see that as a problem, and that's kind of their stance, and that erupted up the Twitter sphere in big ways. So that's kind of the first part of the story. Any thoughts there before I move on?
Yeah, it's good reason to have your own repos for your artifacts like gems.
Yeah, definitely. Didn't we learn our lesson from left padding in the Node.js days?
Yeah.
Oh man.
I think Seth has every right to not continue working on the product on Sugar and the other gems that he wrote. I don't think it has done any good for the community in general. It just makes people doubt open source. If people can just pull something like this, who knows what consequences there may have been for them not being available anymore.
Yeah, how would he feel if an emergency room went down?
Exactly. Yeah.
100 people died because of him.
Yeah. Yeah, and we don't really know. And bearing in mind that Chef entered into this agreement to sell the software or sell the licenses before the Trump presidency, before these policies are in place, it's I don't know. I see his point. He has the right to make a stand. I wouldn't have done the same thing personally.
Yeah, I struggle with this one because I appreciate that he had the moral compass and integrity to do something. I don't think he thought about the bigger ramifications of doing that something, and I think we're in a weird political place where, if we only sell software to the politicians that we like, it makes it unstable for them to buy open source, and that's damaging to the open source community as a whole. And that, I think, results in more companies like Palantir getting more business to do things that we don't see and are opaque to us in the community. And I think I said it on this podcast before. I'd rather know that they're using Amazon Transcribe, and Amazon Transcribe isn't always the best. But I know what that technology is because I can use it myself, and I know how threatening or not threatening it is, versus something like Palantir, which I just don't really know anything about, and it kind of concerns me a little bit. There's some interesting things here that Barry said in his letter, and the one that really rubbed the community in the wrong way was, I've made a principled decision with the support of the Chef executive team to work with institutions of our government, regardless of whether or not we personally agree with their various policies. I want to be clear that this decision is not about the contract value, it is about maintaining a consistent and fair business approach in these volatile times, which, people we're not happy about, to sum it up really well. And so that was all back on the 19th of September, Thursday, Friday of that week. There was an update from their CTO, Corey Scobie, who basically wrote a blog post with the full postmortem of it, kind of the timeline of what happened, how they restored service. He did talk about in his article that they mistakenly replaced Seth's name from the repo. That was an accident in their hurry to just get it fixed for their customers, which is a easy escape, easy excuse to make. I don't know if that was actually the case, but there's definitely someone did the wrong thing there, but they did fix it. They did revert that change. And then he followed up with a personal blog post that he wrote about how his personal feelings about ICE and overall. And he quotes saying, I am proud to be part of a community that boldly states, you must do the right thing. Yet that statement simultaneously hurts me. Why? It hurts because it tells me that I gave you reason to believe otherwise. I gave you reason to think that Chef wasn't doing the right thing, and that's something I have to own. It tells me that I failed to do an effective communicator about my feelings on this matter. So it was interesting, a little bit of humanity in this scenario. And then finally on Monday, their CEO, Chef, basically caved to the pressure from the community, wrote a new blog post saying that they basically started working with ICE in 2014 and 2015, like I mentioned earlier. Admits that it was under different circumstances, and after deep introspection and dialogue within Chef, they decided to not renew their current contract with ICE and CBP when they expire next year, and they will fulfill the obligations of the current contract. And then Chef also committed to donating an amount equivalent to their 2019 revenues from the two entities to charities that help vulnerable people impacted by the policy of family separation and detention. And he apologized for, of course, the painful events over the past week. Which, if this was the first blog post he had written about it, I think we wouldn't be talking about this. But this is a really bad way to handle an emergency crisis in your community, and I think they eroded a lot of trust in the Chef space. And I wouldn't be entirely shocked to see a fork or a bigger movement to Ansible or SaltStack or something else in response to this.
The world is a very divided place right now, and what's moral or what's right is very subjective, and I don't think anybody thinks that separating children from their families is right by any means. But when there's 49% of people with one opinion and 51% with another opinion, it's very hard to please everybody.
Impossible. And then just take it to the next level. Forget open source. Just think about if all vendors did this.
Yeah, well, that goes back to my comment about, I don't know how I feel about a world where we only sell software to the government when it's the political party that we agree with. Yeah. That's a bad place to be in, and it just makes open source unviable for government, and that's a problem. And then we end up paying for that as taxpayers and paying a lot more money for licensing because they're paying for these really bloated enterprise products that don't work. Look at Obamacare and how much money they wasted getting that website up to have it replaced mostly with open source software that works.
Yeah.
So another interesting article that I stumbled across in the interwebs this week was from Wall Street Journal, and I apologize, this is behind a paywall for most of you, unless you're subscribing to the Wall Street Journal. I actually subscribed just to read this article, and then I unsubscribed, so there you go. But there's a grassroots campaign to take down Amazon, apparently, is funded by Amazon's biggest rivals. So 18 months ago, a new nonprofit group called Free and Fair Markets Initiative launched a national campaign criticizing the business practices of Amazon.com. They accuse Amazon of stifling competition and innovation, inhibiting consumer choice, gorging on government subsidies, and endangering its warehouse workers and exposing consumer data to privacy breaches. They claim to have grassroots support for average citizens across the U.S., citing a labor union, a Boston management professor, and a California businessman. But of course, what they didn't tell you was that they were receiving backing from Amazon.com rivals, including Simon Property Group, which owns most of the malls across the country, Walmart, and software giant Oracle. The grassroots support that they also claimed to have was apparently a labor union that said they did not have permission to use their name, and they do not support this initiative. The Boston professor says the group, with his permission, ghostwrote an op-ed for him about Amazon that he didn't know would name him as a member. And the California businessman apparently was dead for months before his name was removed.
Oh my God. That's so great.
Free and Fair Markets currently is run by a strategic communications firm called Marathon Strategies that works for large corporations, including many, many Amazon rivals. And apparently they initially asked companies for a $250,000 fee per company to fund this anti-Amazon group. So that's just dirty politics right there. That's all I have to say about that.
I don't know. I think it's super cute when three monopolies team up together to claim that they're in the name of free trade and go attack the other monopoly. It's cute.
Yeah, it's cute. I mean, Amazon, of course, is not commenting on the story, but internally they must just be like, "Oh my God, these people are so stupid."
Yeah. Or you could spend your time and money trying to make a better experience for your customers. And
exactly. Yeah. I mean, I don't really enjoy malls because they're not interesting to go to anymore. But they were back in the '90s, just not now.
You know what? They would make really good Amazon distribution hubs, though. So maybe they should stop screaming and yelling and.
They also used to make really good, managed data centers for rack space too.
Oh yeah, they bought old malls down in San Antonio.
Yes, there you go.
Yeah. Well, weren't the Free and Fair Markets people behind the whole New York Amazon second headquarters failure? I think it happened right about the time we started the podcast last year, and they were the grassroots movement that kind of
they were definitely involved in some of the noise around Amazon's headquarters too and all of that. But there's a whole bunch of other reasons why that failed for them. There's actually a couple of really good articles in Wired about it, but I didn't link to, or we haven't talked on the show. But that really talk about the whole scenario, how it went down, and why Amazon pulled the plug ultimately. Many people in New York are saying they just couldn't hang with New Yorkers who are just vocal people. So there you go.
Yeah, I wonder if they were paid by Free and Fair Markets too. I mean, I love that name though, Free and Fair Markets. The hypocrisy is not
brought
lost.
to you by Oracle, Amazon, or Walmart, and Simon Group. Yeah,
Simon Group is the best. We want to get in on this. I could just hear that guy. Yeah,
for sure. All right, well, that was general news. Let's move on to AWS this week, who had some cool announcements. First of all, they had previously promised some new G4 instances. Of course, the G4s are the NVIDIA T4 Tensor Core GPUs. They are labeled as the G4 DN class, and they go from .x large to .16x large. On the smallest configuration of this, you get one T4 Tensor GPU, and with 16 gigs of RAM and 4 vCPUs. On the larger side of it, you can get one that has 4 core GPUs and 48 cores, vCPUs, and 192 gigs of RAM. So pretty big boxes. They do also offer you a metal version of this, which will come with 8 Tensor Core GPUs and 96 virtual CPUs and 384 gigs of RAM. So these are big boxes to do a lot of big data type activities using machine learning and GPUs.
And they're really accessible price-wise as well, starting at 50 cents an hour. And this is the kind of thing you're going to spin up and then spin down again, either on a spot market or just on demand. But it's 50 cents an hour is amazing value.
Yeah, very good value for the small one.
You think when NVIDIA started and they were just making cool graphic cards for people to play video games, had any idea that this is where their company was going?
Oh, I
absolutely not.
No idea. Yeah,
it's so cool.
Yeah, like what? But you want to use a graphics cards to do what? The fact that they're still referred to as graphics cards is hilarious,
right? Totally.
Yeah, it is interesting they haven't really moved away from the GPU nomenclature because, it's so much more than graphics now. I was also impressed that the larger one, the 8x large, the 16x large, you can get up to 50 gigs of gigabits per second of network bandwidth. That's huge. And 7 gigabits to the EBS. That's some serious bandwidth through these boxes.
Yep.
Just think how much money you could spend at that rate.
I can download the entire internet, Jonathan, in hours.
Yeah.
Sweet. Step functions have gotten a very long desired feature. They now support dynamic parallelism. Of course, AWS Step Functions is a fully managed service that makes coordinating tasks easier by letting you design and run workflows that are made of steps, each step, of course, receiving input and output from the previous step. And now they support, with this dynamic parallelism, they use the Amazon state language to use a mapping function for dynamic parallelism. Apparently you could used to do static, but the static was, if you needed 10 of them, you always had to have 10 of them, even if you didn't need 10. The new dynamic capability will dynamically scale it based on your need, and they can do fan out and scatter gather methods of fan out for you. So, yeah. Well, the other interesting, cool feature that Amazon released is the new Amazon S3 same region replication. This now allows you it supports automatic and asynchronous replication of newly uploaded S3 objects to a destination bucket in the exact same region you put it into. So this is a very well needed feature for those of you who have potentially a need to store data in a different account for different applications, maybe in a data lake or some other thing, or you want to replicate the data as it gets written to one bucket into a data lake bucket, for example. There was workarounds for this in the past where you could do things like, I'm going to replicate my data from US West 2 to US West 1 and then back, which is really awful because now you're triple paying for this basic functionality. So this is really nice that this is now available to you. This does work across accounts as well as in the same region, and is just a nice feature in general.
So do you think they actually copy the object, or do you think they just reference the object which already exists?
I feel like they actually copy it, because if they were crossing the account boundary and just doing a reference, I feel like that would be some type of violation of some type of security control they have.
Yeah, maybe. And I'm thinking, if there's a
plus, they can't charge you twice if they only give you pointers to it.
Well,
they can.
You could, yeah.
They absolutely can.
They absolutely can. It's true.
I guarantee you there's tons of friggin' dedupe technologies going on in the back end there that we're not seeing.
I wonder if they allow you to copy between different tiers. Like, can I go to infrequent access in a different account, or can I go directly to Glacier in a different account? I assume I could with lifecycle policies of some sort. But I still think it's a great feature, because I think I know we have some use cases where this might come in handy for things like, hey, we want to keep this data out of this account in case of someone hijacking our account and encrypting all of our data and ransoming us.
Right.
So there are some use cases.
That's a really good use case.
Yeah, where this data, if I could write it out to another account where I can't edit it, then there's some opportunities there, as well as for immutable and for auditing purposes. There's quite a few really interesting use cases this enables for you. Moving on to an announcement I missed, so apologies for this. Apparently they announced this on September 12th, but my pre-work of the show failed me. They have announced a new vCPU-based on-demand instance limit, and they're available for EC2. This apparently was announced, like I mentioned, on the 12th, but they just added it recently here into the console. So as you're in the EC2 system, you can immediately see the new vCPU-based service limits. You can make the toggle between, from the old version to the new version. So basically, for those of you, since we didn't cover this on the 12th, They are eliminating the long-held, C5 instance limits, based on an instance class. So there used to be an A limit, a C limit, a D limit, and then that was also based on size. So you can only run maybe 20 of each instance type in your account before you'd hit a service limit, which was super annoying for those trying to really get started with Terraform or some other things. We're trying to spin up a lot of instances in a new account. And so your very first support case, of course, would always be to Amazon to increase your service limit for whatever instance type you wanted, which was annoying. And so they have now changed that to a vCPU-based service limit. So instead of having a C5 X large service limit, it's now 100 CPU. The base default is 256 vCPUs in an account, and you can use that across. You could launch 32 M5 2X larges, or you could launch 15 C5 4X larges, or any combination of those. It's all based on that CPU limit, and that can be increased at any time through the normal increase limit process. They also now make that available if you are using the old method. There's a one-time transition process where you click the button and they'll automatically calculate the number you need right now, plus a little extra, and that way you don't have to do anything special for your first conversion to this. This is an opt-in until October 24th, and then this will become automatically applied to all AWS accounts, so definitely something to take a look at to make sure you're not surprised if you have a very spiky workload.
Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't want to turn this on? It's so much easier than what we have right now, and especially having to click through the console to request the changes to all the different tiers. But I'm kind of hoping that this is the first step in a path to kind of normalize the cost of instances based on exactly the resources you get.
Yeah, I would hope it's kind of the first step towards that world. That'd be great. Should mention here, they do have actually a couple of vCPU limit groups. So the basic one is for standard instances, so A, C, D, M's, R's, and T's, and a couple others as well. Those are all in that standard one. Then there's a different group for the more expensive units, like the FPGA boxes, the graphic intensive and GPU specialized memory optimized X instances, etc. Those are a different vCPU group. So if you're concerned about, hey, I add 300 vCPUs and then my account gets hacked and they launch 300 vCPUs of X instances, that's not really possible. They're two different groups unless you increase that one.
Yeah, I mean, if I was a hacker, the first thing I'd do is just submit a support ticket to ask for the limits to be increased.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I don't really, when it's rubber stamp, I don't really get what the benefit is. But anyway, I guess you get the emails. You might get the emails to your root account. You'll see it happening.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, some of them are actually complicated limits in the back end when you find out, what they actually have to do and the things sometimes it takes code pushes to lift limits. But yeah, these instance limits were never that way. Google has announced the new virtual display devices for Compute Engine. Basically, these are virtual GPUs, but not high-powered ones that you can attach to your servers. They emulate video graphics arrays or VGA capabilities without having to use those expensive Tensor GPUs because they want to sell those to you for more money elsewhere. Many system management tools, remote desktop software, and graphical applications, of course, require you to connect to a display device on a remote server, and so you need these capabilities for the server. This works out of the box with Windows and does support Linux VMs as well. And they've been working with several partners, including Itopa, Nutanix, and Teradata, to enable several different remote desktop solutions on their technology. So, super nice improvement. I assume this is a first step into really being able to offer a workspaces type solution on Google, which they don't really have right now.
I had to laugh at this thing because Linux has had X Windows and the X Windows protocol for such a long time, and you could have massive servers in the cloud, and anyone could have a desktop with graphics, and the server didn't need its own graphics emulator. It's obviously Windows. It's much more important for Windows than it is for Linux. But in the X Windows world, the server is actually the client, which is providing the resources, the graphics resources, to the machine running in the cloud, I guess. So it's just a weird way to think about it. It
took me a little while actually reading through this article to think that through, because I wasn't quite understanding it at first. Then I was like, oh, yeah, I get it. Now thinking about X Windows and how that worked. Actually, one of the examples they used was from Struct Inspect, which apparently does 3D modeling, and so they were able to use this technology for remote workstations using Teradata cloud access software to basically be able to do 3D modeling in this technology. So, it's not nothing to sneeze at. It's not as good as a Tensor's GPU, but it definitely can do quite a bit of stuff. Container native load balancing is now available generally for everybody on GKE. So last year, of course, they announced the container native load balancer feature. That allows you to create services using network endpoint groups so that requests to your service get load balanced directly to the containers serving the request. So this is a very common Kubernetes pattern where you have a set of Kubernetes pods or services running that you then have like an Nginx type forward proxy in the system, basically handling all the reverse proxying to the containers. Now with this new container native load balancing, you don't have to have that Nginx proxy in place, and so this is all natively integrated and very simple to deploy. And much more performant, scalable, and a better user experience overall.
I can't believe that you always talk about the features you can't believe weren't there on day one. This is one that is hilarious, watching us spin up Nginx clusters on the cluster. It just
to do proxying.
Yeah.
You see very quickly how you got to service mesh, because you have all these Kubernetes servers that are running, all running their own Nginx proxy, servicing traffic to the nodes that are running on the different boxes, which you need, of course, for high availability. And then you had to route all the traffic through that, and you're like, well, now I have to have a load balancer that talks to all these pods, or I can put a service mesh in the middle of this, and I can make it all even more abstracted away. So it's really interesting how that all kind of came to be.
I was trying to think of whether the performance would be better in the new model than the old model. I guess it comes down to the fact that with the Nginx proxy in the middle, you have two lots of SSL session being established.
Yep, exactly. So I mean, it's not a huge performance boost, but for some applications, it might really matter. So
yeah, I guess it's for the first connection from a client, it should be noticeable. I read some statistics a while ago about how long mobile users will wait for a page to load before they'll click off and do something else, and we're talking 2 seconds. People are so impatient.
Yeah, I just also think about manageability, another layer that you don't have to manage, and you don't have to worry about keeping up to date and can't get hacked.
Man, my gigabit internet at my house makes me so spoiled when I'm out traveling at hotels with crappy internet. And you're like, why is this taking so long? Oh, yeah, there's probably only like a basic cable modem for the entire hotel that I paid $20 for, because that's how hotels work.
Some people pick the location based on good schools, good commute times. Me and Justin picked location based on gigabit internet.
Yes, for sure.
Clearly, I didn't do that.
You did not. That's very true with your ghetto Wi-Fi at your house. I wish Redfin or Zillow had that as a filtering model. Like, hey, can I only look at houses that have gigabit internet capability?
Yeah.
That would really make finding my next house much easier. All right, moving on to Azure. Man, here we are again with premium tiers of files. The new Azure File Premium tier gets its own redundant storage is now generally available. This is available for pretty much everybody who uses normal Azure, but if you're using a file-based account, which is some type of special storage-based Azure account, you can only use this in Western Europe. So sorry if you're not in Western Europe, you can't use this feature. But this is now generally available. Of course, Azure ZRS premium storage should be considered for managed file services where performance and regional availability are critical for the business. And just more confusion in the world of disks on Azure.
Why can't you just give a good service to everybody?
I don't know.
Or sell a good service to everybody. It's not like it's, not that they're not charging for the non-premium tier.
Well, you would think it's actually more expensive in the long run to support all these different tiers of storage, right? Versus, I just have magnetic, I have SSD, and I have provisioned IOPS on AWS. And it's like, well, it's very simple. There's those three types. We can combine them in any level of RAID that we want to in the back end and present it to the customer, which is us, in a performing way, and that's how we handle it. Versus, make the customer make all these really complicated decisions on which storage tier they need in premium blobs and premium file and ultra premium file. It's just, it's so much complexity to push to the end user. I just don't understand why they're doing this.
I don't know. I'm used to premium services, and I don't know if I could use file systems that were created just for the common man.
So you must be using all PIOPS on all your EBS volumes.
Just because I can.
You are definitely getting paid way more than we are, because those are expensive PIOPS.
Yeah.
Just reading through the post just reminded me why I always hated the Azure console.
Yes. I sort of have this rule, like when people call me about, opportunities, which I'm not really interested in at the moment, but, they say like, oh yeah, we're doing a cloud transformation on Azure. And I'm like, yeah, thanks. I don't want to talk to you anymore, because I just don't want to deal with it. It's just so much. Anyways. All right. Moving on to the next one. Introducing the cost-effective increment snapshots of Azure managed disks are now in preview. So apparently, this is all about making incremental snapshots more cost-effective for you. Apparently they, as you always know, would snapshot the entire EBS volume or managed disk volume that you attached, apparently even if it wasn't full. And so you paid for that entire thing on every snapshot. Now with the new incremental snapshots, you're only paying for the delta charges. So, thanks for that, I guess.
Welcome to 2012.
Indeed.
Ding, ding, ding.
This is great because now all that extra money you spent on premium file services, you can get it back here.
All right, that's it for new news. Let's move on to the lightning round, Peter.
All right, we're going to blow through this one. Introducing new Amazon EC2 Windows Server AMIs for DISA STIG compliance.
I don't know what the STIG racer has to do with any of this, but...
Oh, nice. Ding, ding. Yeah, it's one of my favorite people of all time, even though it's been multiple people.
It's the unknown person.
Mm-hmm.
I guess it drives faster than the regular Windows Server AMIs.
Oh, nice. Nice. We got competition today. Two, they both came out punching. I love it. Amazon EKS announces beta release of Amazon EFS CSI driver.
Let me find my sunglasses real quick to rip them off. Yeah.
I can't beat that.
The Amazon API Gateway simplifies invoking private APIs.
There is nothing simple about the API Gateway.
Ooh, it's true.
There's really nothing other than invoking private APIs either, so I like that there's a contest that I would want to invoke public APIs for my gateway, which is not the case.
Amazon Workspaces introduces Workspaces Restore to the last known healthy state.
You know, it never worked on my Windows boxes when they rebooted and said, I can't boot. Try the last known good state. It never worked
F9.
then. Why would it work on Amazon?
F9. Press F9.
F9. Amazon Aurora Serverless Postgres now supports Data API.
I like it, actually. We should have talked about this more in the show. I think it's... I have nothing bad to say about this, but it's obviously so that they're standardizing the way you get to data so that they can tweak stuff on the back end without you realizing. It's pretty cool.
Oh,
exactly.
Boy. Jonathan, I like it. Good job.
It is cool, but I didn't. I will tell you all that I procrastinated very badly on the show notes this week because I had other things to do for vacation, and I was behind, so I didn't really have a chance to read this one to move it up. I moved a bunch of stuff down because I got lazy, but I didn't move this up, so sorry.
It solves the problem of having 3,000 Lambda instances all trying to do something at the same time. You're not going to have a Postgres server answering 3,000 concurrent connections to Lambda.
Well, it really solves the big problem, which is resource pooling or connection pooling on SQL servers.
Exactly.
Because that's just it's death in a Lambda world, so it makes a lot of sense.
AWS Lambda now supports custom batch window for Kinesis and DynamoDB event sources.
Yay.
Ooh, that's a lot of words.
That's pretty cool. I mean, I don't really know, in a serverless world, why it would matter how often unless there's some big overhead to start.
I assume it's that this is for people who have batch workload, but they only want the batch workload to happen at night. But they want it to be basically, only scalable to the batch that they have, and so you basically say I can only allow this batch Lambda function to run between the hours of 10 o'clock at night and 5 a.m. Because I don't want it to impact my production day. That's
no. Totally not what it is. It's all about if there's a stream of data coming in, Amazon will batch the stream into chunks and then pass it as chunks to Lambda instead of invoking Lambda once per event. They'll invoke Lambda with 100 events in a payload.
Oh, that's a winner. I think we have a winner.
That's actually interesting because it actually solves data aggregation problems with doing metrics, custom metrics into AWS. So you instead of doing basically every metric every second or every millisecond, I can now aggregate them up and batch them in and still get that level of detail processed through Lambda. So that's what they probably built that for then. That makes sense.
I kind of wonder if it was related to, if it was like a prerequisite for getting the MapReduce stuff done for step functions.
Okay.
Step 1, cut a hole in the box.
Or it's the beginning of a feature set that's going to be needed for something awesome at reInvent. That's what I'm hoping for.
Maybe. Moving on, AWS joins the .NET Foundation.
Pepper Ridge Farm remembers when the .NET Foundation was nothing, and no one knew what .NET was, and I miss those days because I don't like what .NET is now.
I'm sure Microsoft will love having Amazon being in the .NET Foundation.
This is really a me too for AWS because Google already jumped in on this, and Oracle jumped in on this, and AWS is the last one standing, so... This is really a me too or us too moment for them.
I just want to know why they didn't join the Silverlight Foundation. Moving on.
Wow.
Whoa. Ding.
Totally showing your age, mentioning stuff like that.
That was a ding just on that callback. I haven't thought of that in a long time.
At Open World, Oracle struggles to move the cloud needle its way.
Hey, I'm not the only one who thought that, I guess.
You're not. That is for sure.
No, it's so funny watching the blog posts about Oracle World and how they change from day to day, and people are spinning it just a little bit more and a little bit more, and all of a sudden Oracle are fantastic, and we should all go all in on them.
Really? Day 2 and day 3 keynote was brutal. Like, I mean, day 1 was the Trump show of Oracle, and then day 2 and 3 were all business services around Oracle Cloud apps and Oracle Financials and, Oracle Business Services and a bunch of stuff there. And it was just, and then Wednesday was NetSuite Day, which NetSuite's actually awesome. I like NetSuite, but, they are owned by the Oracle, so, what are you going to do? But that's not really a compelling keynote for most people unless you're using NetSuite.
Amazon Redshift announces automatic workload management and query priorities.
Why can't they just call this auto-scaling for Redshift? Why are we using all these new words and verbs? Can we just simplify this, please?
And Amazon Athena adds support for inserting data into a table using the results of a select query or using a provided set of values.
So when I read this the first time, I was thinking it was saying that my Athena query of S3, I could then insert data back into S3. And I was like, why would I do that? And then as I read it more now, I'm realizing that it's inserting data from the Athena query directly into a SQL table, which is actually kind of nice, I guess, for summarizing for certain reasons. So it's kind of a nice poor man's EMR job into a data warehouse.
I guess you could use it as temporary tables.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe the start of Amazon competing with Snowflake.
Ooh. And that wraps it up. I got to give it to Jonathan for the highly eye-opening uses for custom batch.
He schooled me on that one because I didn't read the article, apparently.
I actually think Peter should get it for the Silverlight. And what was the other thing he said? There was another one. I'd concede the point.
I'm out.
Speaking of Silverlight, have you noticed if you're a Chrome user, they started having this bar at the top of every single page, which is incredibly annoying right now, which is like, Adobe Flash is being discontinued in 2020. Do you want to turn it off now? I'm like, why? Why would I turn it off now if it's going to be supported for another 18 months?
Warning, it's about to go off. Would you rather turn it off sooner?
You must run the release channel of Chrome, because I've been having that for like 9 months now, and I run the beta channel, and it's been annoying me for much longer than a year. So
I wait for it to pretty much tell me it's going to have to turn itself off, otherwise it's going to self-destruct.
That's your Google Chrome upgrade strategy? That's great. I mean, you can always go with the Safari model and switch to that, and then it only gets updated once a year when they update the OS. Well, it's been a great time here once again, here at the Cloud Pod. We will be on... Oh, I will be gone. I don't know about these guys. They might have something special planned for you while I'm gone for a show, but I will not be here next week. So if you hear them, then they followed through on recording a podcast that they promised me they would do. And if not, then they failed me, and I will chastise them appropriately when I get back from my vacation in a few weeks. So thanks, guys. Have a good couple weeks while I'm out, and I'll see you on the other side.
All right, good night.
And that is the Week in Cloud. We'd like to thank our sponsor, Foghorn Consulting. Subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and tweet us your feedback at #TheCloudPod. Or join our Slack channel, go to our website, thecloudpod.net, for sign-up instructions.